It wasn't unusual for me to stay behind after practice. As the star quarterback of the team, perfection was expected of me, and I took pride in meeting those expectations. Coach Harris, a seasoned trainer with piercing hazel eyes and a calm authority, often volunteered to help me refine my technique. But lately, there was something different in the air. His encouragement lingered longer, his hand on my shoulder firmer. "Ethan, keep your stance balanced," he said, adjusting my position during a passing drill. His voice carried a warmth that made my chest tighten. I nodded, trying to focus on the ball, but his presence was distracting in ways I couldn't admit aloud. The evening stretched on as the sun dipped below the horizon. The rest of the team had gone, leaving just the two of us on the empty field. Coach clapped his hands together, signaling the end of practice. "Good work today," he said, his voice softer than usual. There was a pause, the kind that begged to be filled, but lingered awkwardly instead. "Thanks, Coach," I murmured, turning to grab my water bottle. But before I could walk away, he spoke again, his tone quieter now. "Ethan, you're doing great. I just—" He hesitated, and when I looked back, his expression was unreadable. That moment changed everything. It wasn't what he said. It was the way he looked at me, like I was more than just another player. I felt my breath catch as his eyes held mine, unspoken words hanging between us. I didn't know what to do with the surge of emotion that followed. Over the next few weeks, I found myself staying behind more often. The drills became an excuse to spend time alone with him. The field, once a place of competition, turned into a sanctuary for something unspoken but undeniable. I couldn't explain it then, but I felt safe with him, as if we'd stumbled upon a secret world where we could just be. That first spark planted the seed of what would become the most thrilling and dangerous chapter of my life. The routine became our silent agreement. Practice ended, the team left, and Coach Harris and I stayed behind. At first, it was just extra drills, harmless adjustments to my throwing technique or discussions about game strategy. But slowly, the distance between us began to close, and the touches, once professional, lingered just a moment too long. One evening, after a particularly intense session, Coach leaned against the goalpost as I finished my sprints. "You're pushing yourself hard," he said, his voice even but laced with something else, something I couldn't place. I shrugged, trying to play it cool. "Comes with the territory," I replied, wiping sweat from my forehead. But the look he gave me wasn't that of a coach. It was personal, almost tender, and it made my heart race. He took a step closer, his voice dropping as he said, "You don't have to do this alone, Ethan. You've got people who care about you." His words caught me off guard. For a moment, I didn't feel like the golden boy of the team, the player everyone relied on. I felt like just me. "I know," I whispered, my throat tightening. It was a simple response, but the weight of the moment made it feel like a confession. Before I could second-guess myself, he closed the space between us, his hand brushing mine. I froze, unsure of what to do, but he didn't push. "If this is too much," he started, his tone soft and reassuring, but I shook my head, cutting him off. Without thinking, I leaned in, our lips meeting in a kiss that felt like stepping off a ledge. It was exhilarating and terrifying all at once. From that moment on, there was no going back. We had crossed the line, and while we both knew the risks, neither of us was willing to stop. From that first kiss, our stolen moments became a routine. Every practice was a balancing act between the roles we had to play publicly and the secret we were desperate to protect. On the field, Coach Harris was the same stern leader, his voice commanding and sharp. But when the team left, he became someone else, softer, more vulnerable. After a late practice, I stayed behind to help clean up, knowing it was just an excuse to be alone with him. As I picked up a stray helmet, he appeared behind me, his voice low. "You don't have to stay every night, you know." I turned to face him, unable to hide the smile tugging at my lips. "And miss this?" I teased. He chuckled, the sound warmer than I'd ever heard it before. It was moments like these that made the risk feel worth it. We'd linger in the locker room, careful not to leave any evidence behind. His hands would brush against mine as he helped me pack my gear. And sometimes, when the world felt far away, he'd pull me into his arms. His touch was careful, but his grip spoke of a longing we could never express in words. But secrets are heavy, and ours grew heavier with every passing day. My teammates started to notice the way I stayed late after practice, their jokes lighthearted at first, but tinged with curiosity. "What's up with you and Coach?" Ryan asked one day, his tone casual, but his eyes sharp. "Just extra practice," I replied quickly, my voice steady. He raised an eyebrow, but didn't push further. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me more closely than before. The pressure of hiding began to take its toll. Every glance felt like a threat, every comment like a potential revelation. But no matter how dangerous it became, I couldn't let go of what we had. For the first time in my life, I felt seen. Not as an athlete or a golden boy, but as a person. Ryan's curiosity didn't fade. If anything, it grew stronger. He started lingering after practice, his presence a constant reminder that our secret wasn't as safe as we thought. One evening, as I grabbed my bag to leave, he stopped me. "You know, Ethan, you've been spending a lot of time with Coach." I forced a laugh, hoping to deflect, just trying to stay ahead of the game. "Sure," he replied, his tone light but his eyes narrowing. "Guess that makes sense." He walked away, but something in his expression made my stomach churn. That night, I told Coach about Ryan's questions. "He's suspicious," I said, pacing the locker room. "What if he finds out?" Coach leaned against the bench, his face thoughtful. "We've been careful," he said, his voice steady. "There's no way he could know." But I wasn't convinced. Ryan was persistent, and I could feel his eyes on me during practice, his gaze lingering just a little too long. It was only a matter of time before he acted on his suspicions. The breaking point came a week later. After practice, I noticed Ryan hanging back, his phone in hand. He was pretending to scroll through messages, but his eyes kept darting toward the locker room. I tried to ignore him, but my nerves were frayed. That evening, I stayed with Coach as usual, our time together a brief reprieve from the tension. We talked about everything and nothing, his voice a calming presence as I rested my head on his shoulder. "We'll be okay," he whispered, his tone gentle but firm. But as I left the locker room, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The air felt heavy, charged with an energy I couldn't explain. And for the first time, I wondered if our secret wasn't as safe as we thought. Ryan's suspicion reached a boiling point. Unbeknownst to me, he had taken things further. A hidden camera, small and barely noticeable, was now nestled in a corner of the locker room, its lens angled perfectly to capture the moments I thought were private. That evening, practice ended as usual. The team filed out, leaving Coach Harris and me behind. As the door clicked shut, the air between us shifted, as it always did when we were alone. His voice softened. "Rough day?" I nodded, leaning against the bench. "Ryan's watching me like a hawk," I admitted, the tension in my chest spilling out in my words. Coach frowned, his brow furrowed with concern. "We can stop this, Ethan," he said, but there was a sadness in his tone that made my stomach drop. "No," I said firmly, stepping closer. "I'm not giving this up." His eyes met mine, a mixture of pride and worry. We kissed then, the world outside forgotten for just a moment. The camera recorded everything. The next morning, Ryan skipped practice. I didn't think much of it at first, but when I checked my phone during a water break, my heart stopped. Notifications poured in. Texts, missed calls, social media tags. My teammates whispered, their eyes darting between me and their phones. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. No one answered, but the look on their faces said enough. I pulled out my phone and opened a link one of them had sent. The video played, and my worst fears were realized. The video spread like wildfire. Within hours, it was on every platform, shared and reshared until it felt inescapable. The caption read, "Coach and QB extra practice," followed by laughing emojis. My stomach churned as I read the comments, some cruel, others mocking, but all equally humiliating. Coach Harris called me that afternoon. "Ethan," he began, his voice strained, "I'm so sorry. I should have protected you better." "This isn't your fault," I said quickly, but the words felt hollow. The damage was done, and neither of us could stop it. By evening, the school had issued a statement announcing Coach Harris's suspension pending an investigation. My teammates avoided me, their once friendly banter replaced by awkward silences. Ryan, however, seemed almost smug, his eyes meeting mine with a triumphant gleam. Coach and I met one last time in his office. His face was tired, lines of stress etched deep into his skin. "I don't regret us," he said quietly, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for mine. "But you need to move on. Don't let them destroy you." I didn't know what to say. All I could do was nod, tears blurring my vision as he pulled me into a tight embrace. It felt like goodbye. I left the team the next day. The humiliation was too much to bear, and the thought of facing my teammates, especially Ryan, was unbearable. My parents, unaware of the full extent of the scandal, suggested I take time away. I packed my things and moved to a small town 3 hours away, far from the spotlight. Life in the countryside was quiet. I traded the roar of the stadium for the hum of crickets and the rustle of leaves. It was a stark contrast to the life I had known, but in some ways, it was a relief. Here, no one knew my name or my story. I could breathe again. But peace came at a cost. The distance between Coach and me was more than physical. It was emotional. We talked less and less, the weight of our separation growing heavier with each passing day. One evening, I received a text from him. It was brief, just 3 words. "I miss you." I stared at the screen, my heart aching with a longing I couldn't shake. But I didn't reply. I didn't know how to. The silence stretched on, and though I tried to move forward, a part of me remained stuck in the past, tied to the man I had loved and the life we had shared. It was late at night when my phone rang, jolting me out of a restless sleep. The screen flashed with an unfamiliar number, and for a moment, I debated ignoring it. But something about the timing made me pick up. The voice on the other end was shaky, hesitant, and full of dread. Ethan, the person began, pausing as if unsure how to continue. It's about Coach Harris. A chill ran through me. I sat up, gripping the phone tighter. What happened? I asked, my voice trembling despite my attempt to sound calm. He was in an accident, the voice said softly. He didn't make it. The words felt like a punch to the chest, knocking the air out of my lungs. I couldn't speak, couldn't think. All I could do was sit there, the silence between us heavy and suffocating. Are you sure? I finally managed, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm so sorry, Ethan, they said before the line went dead. The next few hours passed in a blur. I stared at the walls of my tiny apartment, my mind replaying every moment I'd ever shared with him. His laugh, the way he'd look at me when he thought no one else was watching, the quiet confidence in his voice that had always made me feel safe. Now, all of it was gone. The details of the accident trickled in over the following days. He had been driving home late, likely distracted by the stress of everything that had happened. The roads were dark and slick from rain, and his car had veered off into a ditch. They said it was quick, that he wouldn't have suffered, but that brought me no comfort. Grief consumed me, but so did anger. I couldn't stop thinking about Ryan and the others who had spread the video. Their actions had started this chain of events. They had humiliated him, driven him to despair, and now he was gone. They might not have physically caused the accident, but they were responsible, and I couldn't let them get away with it. I felt lost, adrift in a sea of emotions I couldn't control. Every memory of him was a knife to my heart, a reminder of what I had lost and the life we could have had. I wanted to scream, to cry, to lash out, but instead, I sat there, silent and numb, the weight of it all pressing down on me. Days turned into weeks, but the pain didn't fade. If anything, it grew sharper, cutting deeper with every passing moment. I couldn't escape the memories of him, the life we had shared in secret, the dreams we had dared to imagine together. But more than anything, I couldn't escape the anger that burned inside me, demanding action. One night, I found myself scrolling through social media, the videos still haunting my timeline. The comments were relentless, cruel jokes, mocking laughter, and a few voices of sympathy drowned out by the noise. My stomach churned as I read them, my hands trembling with rage. This wasn't just about me or even Coach Harris. It was about the culture that allowed this kind of hatred to thrive. I knew I couldn't stay silent any longer. Coach had always told me to stand up for what I believed in, to fight for what was right, even when it was hard. And now, I needed to do that for him. I couldn't let his memory be reduced to a scandal, a punchline. He deserved better, and I was determined to give him that. The next morning, I contacted a local news station. I explained my story, careful to leave out the most intimate details, but honest about everything else. The reporter I spoke with seemed hesitant at first, but as I told her more, I could hear the shift in her tone. She agreed to meet with me, and we scheduled the interview for the following day. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, rehearsing what I would say. I knew this wouldn't be easy. There would be backlash, people who wouldn't understand or who would twist my words. But I also knew it was necessary. This wasn't just about justice for Coach Harris. It was about making sure no one else had to go through what we had. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time since his death, I felt like I was doing something that mattered, something that could make a difference. And that thought gave me the strength to keep going. The day of the interview arrived, and I walked into the news station with my head held high, though my hands trembled slightly at my sides. The studio was cold, the lights harsh, but I ignored the discomfort. This wasn't about me. It was about him. The reporter greeted me with a polite smile, her eyes scanning my face as if searching for cracks in my resolve. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice kind but professional. I nodded, taking a deep breath. "Let's do this." As the cameras rolled, I introduced myself, my voice steady, despite the storm raging inside me. "My name is Ethan Walker," I began, "and I'm here to tell the truth about what happened to Coach Harris." I told the story from the beginning, careful to include every detail that mattered. I talked about our relationship, the love we had shared in secret, and the video that had changed everything. I described the humiliation we had faced, the way it had destroyed his career and, ultimately, his life. The video wasn't just an invasion of privacy, I said, my voice firm. It was an act of cruelty that led to the death of a good man. Ryan and the others who spread it thought it was a joke, but their actions had real consequences, and they need to be held accountable. The reporter asked me why I had decided to speak out now, and I looked directly at the camera as I answered. Because silence won't bring him back, but it will let them get away with it. Coach Harris deserved better, and I'm not going to let his memory be tarnished by their hatred. The interview aired that evening, and the response was immediate. Social media exploded with support, people condemning Ryan and the others for their actions. The school issued a formal apology, though it felt hollow in the face of what had happened. An investigation was launched, and while the legal consequences for Ryan and his teammates were minor, their reputations were destroyed. For me, the fight wasn't over, but I felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected. I had honored Coach's memory, told our story, and stood up for what was right. And though it didn't bring him back, it gave me a sense of purpose, a way to move forward. As I walked out of the studio that night, I looked up at the stars and whispered, "I hope you're proud of me." This story is more than a tale of love and loss. It's a powerful reminder of the risks we take when living authentically in a world that often rejects what it doesn't understand. The romance between Ethan and Coach Harris highlights how love can thrive in the most unexpected circumstances, but also how prejudice, intolerance, and cruelty can shatter lives. The tragedy of Coach Harris and the pain Ethan endured force us to question how the actions of others can shape the destiny of two people who just wanted to be happy. This narrative emphasizes the importance of respecting others' privacy and standing against hate, showing how social media can amplify the devastating effects of harmful actions. In the end, Ethan found the strength to fight for justice and preserve Coach Harris's memory, turning his grief into a mission to prevent others from facing the same pain. This story reminds us that even in the darkest moments, courage and truth can ignite a spark of hope. Did you enjoy today's story? If so, leave your rating in the comments below for this emotional story. Your feedback is incredibly important as it helps me improve and bring you even better content. And guess what? This story is based on a real experience shared by one of our followers. You too can have your story turned into an emotional video on this channel. Share your story in the comments below, whether it happened to you or someone you know. Who knows? Your experience could be the next one to move and inspire our audience. Don't forget to rate the story, share your experiences, like this video, Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Your participation is what keeps this channel alive and full of stories that truly matter. Star.